Welcome to Mystery Theater, where we provide comprehensive case overviews in a bite-sized, digestible format in an attempt to help solve cases and provide long-awaited comfort to loved ones. Tonight we take a look at the case of Brianna Maitland, who went missing after leaving her job as a dishwasher in Vermont one night. Her car was found just down the road, and Brianna was nowhere to be found. Was it drug-related? Was it someone she knew? Was it both? Can we learn anything from the hours leading up to Brianna's disappearance? We'll attempt to answer these questions and more in tonight's Mystery Theater, Brianna Maitland. Brianna Alexandra Maitland was born on October 8, 1986, in Burlington, Vermont, to father Bruce and mother Kelly Fisher Maitland. Growing up near the Canadian border in the town of East Franklin, Vermont, Brianna and her older brother grew up on their parents' farm, a lifestyle she seemed to enjoy but would later break away from young as she sought her own independence. She attended Missisquoi Valley Union High School in her freshman year, transferring to Enosburg Falls High 1 year later as a sophomore. On her 17th birthday in October of 2003, Brianna decided to move away from her parents' farm and in with friends. By all reports, things were good at home, and the only reason for this move was a typical teenage yearning for independence and a desire to be closer to a group of friends who lived 15 miles away. Changing high schools, Brianna began to realize the struggles of that independence as she struggled to find stability in her living situation, moving in and out of several friends' homes. By the end of February 2004, she had dropped out of high school and moved in with childhood friend Jillian Stout in Sheldon, Vermont, about 20 miles west of her hometown of Montgomery. Though things were difficult, Brianna was determined to finish her education and enrolled in GED classes. 3 weeks prior to her March 19, 2004 disappearance, Brianna attended a local party. While it's unclear exactly what happened inside, what happened afterwards is clear. Brianna exited the home and sat inside a truck. As she did, a friend of hers, Keely Lacrosse, came outside and hit Brianna in the face several times as she sat in the truck. According to a witness, Brianna, who had extensive jiu-jitsu training, chose not to defend herself, possibly due to her relationship with her attacker, or maybe due to being inebriated and not having all her senses about her. Whatever her reason not to defend herself, she would leave the altercation with a concussion and broken nose. Rumors are that jealousy might have caused the incident, with Brianna talking to a male acquaintance inside the party that set her former friend off in a rage. While she didn't physically fight back, Brianna wasn't about to let her attacker get away unscathed, and promptly filed charges against her as a result of the assault. 3 weeks later, on March 19th, Brianna's hard work paid off, and she spent the morning taking her GED exam. Upon completion, she met her mother for lunch to celebrate. Her father was out of state, working in New York at the time. Kelly describes her daughter as being in a good mood during this lunch and discussing future plans for college. Her high spirits wouldn't last the duration of their time together that day, however. After lunch, the mom and daughter spent the afternoon running errands and shopping together. While standing in the checkout line of a store, something outside caught Brianna's attention, and she left, telling her mother she would be right back. Brianna didn't return by the time Kelly had purchased her items, so she followed Brianna out the way she had left and met her in the parking lot. Brianna's positivity seemed to have faded at this point, and the 17-year-old is described as being unnerved and agitated, shaken by whatever had caught her attention and drew her to the parking lot just minutes before. It was at this point that Kelly made a decision that would haunt her for decades. Not wanting to pry, she chose not to ask Brianna what had happened. With Brianna needing to get ready for her shift at the Black Lantern Inn restaurant in Montgomery, Kelly dropped her off at home between 3:30 and 4 p.m. and said goodbye to her daughter. She was unaware at the time that this would be the last time she would ever see her. As Brianna prepared for work, she left a note for her roommate, Jillian Stout, saying she'd return later that night after work, and she was heading out to the Black Lantern Inn in her 1985 Oldsmobile sedan that was registered to her mother. All noted reports seemed to indicate all was normal at work that evening, and as she finished her work and prepared to end her shift, Brianna's co-workers extended an offer to come hang out. Brianna declined, stating she needed to go home and rest for her second job in St. Albans the next morning. By all accounts, she was alone as she left and drove away from the Black Lantern Inn. This would be the last time Brianna Maitland was seen alive. Early the next afternoon on March 20th, a Vermont state trooper was dispatched to an abandoned house on Route 118, about a mile from the Black Lantern. The old worn-down house, known locally as the Old Dutch Burn House, had an Oldsmobile backed into it, with enough force that the rear end of the vehicle had knocked loose and damaged some of the building's siding. The Oldsmobile was registered to Kelly Maitland. The scene was a mess. A piece of plywood had fallen off of the structure and landed on Brianna's trunk, covering a window. 2 of her paychecks lay on her passenger seat, and loose change, a water bottle, and an unsmoked cigarette were strewn about around the vehicle. It was at this point the state trooper made a curious decision, assuming the car had been abandoned by a drunk driver and simply having it towed to a local garage. This decision likely greatly reduced the odds of Brianna being found alive, or at all, as the first 48 hours after a crime are considered the golden hours, and statistics show this time as vital for the recovery of a missing person. Likewise, Brianna's roommate Jillian Stout saw Brianna's note undisturbed after returning home Monday from a weekend out, and just assumed Brianna had been staying elsewhere. When Brianna again didn't show up the following day on Tuesday, Stout finally called Kelly, who immediately began calling various people in search of her daughter, including Brianna's friends and employers at the Black Lantern Inn. Nobody had heard from her. Kelly, still unaware that her car had been recovered, filed a missing person report on Brianna, but by this point it had been 3.5 days since Brianna was last seen or heard from. 2 days later, on Thursday the 25th, Bruce and Kelly brought photos of her to Vermont State Police in St. Albans. It was at this point police showed them a picture of the abandoned Oldsmobile. There is little that is as powerful as a mother's instinct, and upon seeing the photo of her daughter's abandoned car, Kelly was instinctively revulsed, and she knew someone else had left the car that way, not her daughter. The area around the Old Dutch Burn House was searched by both law enforcement and search dogs, turning up nothing. Despite Maitland family pleas, police did not consider foul play the cause of Brianna's disappearance in the initial months of the investigation, instead concluding she was possibly a runaway. Kelly and Bruce felt otherwise, a feeling only strengthened when Brianna's car was returned to the family and Bruce found his daughter had left her ATM card, glasses, contact lens case, and migraine medication inside of it. Police seemed to consider the possibility of foul play so low that they didn't even take pictures of the crime scene. Instead, all photos that exist of the teenager's car backed into the building were taken the next morning by one of several passerbys who stopped to note how unusual the scene appeared. There are at least 4 known witness sightings of Brianna's vehicle in the late night and morning hours between her disappearance and the arrival of the state trooper. One of these were from Brianna's ex-boyfriend, who reportedly passed by the scene after a night of partying in Canada and thought he recognized the vehicle but reported seeing no one around it. Despite law enforcement's initial feelings, they later concluded foul play was likely the cause. The FBI released a flyer in 2007 that stated the scene may have even been staged to appear as an accident. The Maitlands believed it likely that multiple people may have been involved in their daughter's abduction, as it would have been difficult for a single person to subdue her given her jiu-jitsu training. Jiu-jitsu was a well-known form of defense and fighting style that gained popularity in the late 90s, early 2000s, with the rising popularity of mixed martial arts competitions. It is ideal for self-defense as its methods are designed for smaller practitioners to neutralize larger opponents' size and strength advantages, with carefully crafted grappling and submission techniques. In the early days of Brianna's disappearance, the likelihood of it being related to the disappearance of Maura Murray just a month earlier were explored, with the Murray family even contacting the Maitlands. But it is no longer believed the 2 disappearances could be related, and the theory has been largely dismissed, despite the events occurring within 90 miles of each other. A $20,000 reward for information leading to Brianna's whereabouts remained available for many years, but in June of 2017 it was reported it was set to expire in July of that year. In the early weeks of the investigation, Vermont State Police received a tip anonymously that Brianna was being held against her will in a home in Berkshire, Vermont, a nearby town about 10 miles from Montgomery. The rented home at that time was occupied by 2 known drug dealers from New York, Ramon L. Ryans and Charles Jackson. Upon interviewing close friends of Brianna's, law enforcement learned that not only had Brianna experimented with hard drugs recently, particularly crack cocaine, but that she was also an acquaintance of the pair. On April 15, 2004, police raided the home of Jackson and Ryans, finding substantial amounts of cocaine and marijuana, as well as various drug paraphernalia inside the house. But there was no sign of Brianna. This, however, wasn't the last time the duo would fall under suspicion in relation to her disappearance. In late 2004, an anonymous person described as simply an older female gave a statement to police which implicated Ryans and Jackson for far greater detail, claiming Ryans had murdered Brianna approximately a week after her disappearance during an argument over money lent to purchase crack. It also was said that her body was stored temporarily in the basement of a home belonging to a recently incarcerated woman. The affidavit claims that after Brianna was murdered, her body was dismembered with a table saw and then disposed of on a pig farm. Law enforcement thus far has been unable to corroborate the claims in the letter, and the Maitland family has received additional anonymous phone calls with different and often contradictory claims, including that Brianna was tied to a tree in the woods, as well as disposed of in the bottom of a lake. Whatever fate befell the young teenager, one thing is for sure. Nobody has seen or heard from her since that mysterious night back in March of 2004. Security footage of a woman resembling Brianna at her poker table at Caesars World Casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey provided a little hope, but this woman has never been identified. In 2012, law enforcement investigated the possible connection between Brianna's disappearance and serial killer Israel Keyes, but like with Maura Murray before her, Keyes has largely been ruled out as a possibility. Brianna's case has been profiled on media outlets and programs including Dateline NBC, the investigation Discovery series Disappeared, 2020, and in a 2017 episode of the documentary series The Disappearance of Maura Murray on the Oxygen Network. But despite all this coverage, Brianna is still missing, and her case remains unsolved. So what happened to Brianna Maitland on that cold March night 16 years ago? Are the suspects whose names repeatedly come up responsible, or is someone else entirely that we've never heard of? What makes this case even more heartbreaking than usual, particularly if claims of her being alive for a full week after her disappearance are true, are that if one person made one decision differently, there may have been a different outcome. What if the state trooper reports the vehicle and it's connected to Brianna the morning after, versus more than 3 days later? What if her roommate calls Brianna's mother as soon as she sees the undisturbed note? Furthermore, what if Kelly had pried and had uncovered what had upset Brianna in that parking lot on their shopping trip? Would it have made a difference? We don't know, but all these factors surely don't seem to have helped. But until we know for sure, we're left to wonder. I'm Jason Hebert, and this has been Mystery Theater, Brianna Maitland. I'll see you next time.